One important piece I wanted to start off by saying, and a point I wanted to emphasize, is the correlation between discrimination and mental health and how that affects an individual, especially the effects of compounded generational racial trauma on the body that passes down through family members. But in reference to Janet Helm's text, race is a nice thing to have. I appreciated how it makes you think. Um, from the stages of white racial ethnic identity development, they are key in, forming and establishing a non-racist white identity. And Helms provides concrete and objective steps that everyone can follow without excuses. I also appreciate the stages of reflection provided for people of color to explore their racial and ethnic identities and how those play a role. So from an emotional standpoint, it is relayed, that there is a degree of expectation for white individuals to become defensive and deny when approached about racism and their privilege. Taking away from fundamentals learned in our program and class literature surrounding multiculturalism and social justice, it is essential to facilitate as much of a non-judgmental space as possible when breaking down the behaviors and reactivity associated with discussing race. White individuals, when prompted about privilege, should analyze the internal feelings that spur their emotional reactions about the topic. A situation that comes to mind is the persona of white people stating they are colorblind when it comes to race. Many need to be encouraged and educated on why this mindset does, in fact, reinforce aspects of systemic, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized racism that continues to divide our society. Lack of acknowledgement of the actions of white persons in history negates the experiences of Black individuals and other races that are discriminated against. Lack of effort to discuss how one's white privilege plays a role in everyday life and facilitates racial hierarchy economically, culturally, politically is simply ignorance. Not one person is completely the same, yet there is much that makes us similar. And there is much awareness to be discovered with discussions of race. We often will then realize that regardless of skin color, there are aspects of our individual intersectionalities that overlap, for example, sexuality, gender, age, any disabilities. As a white individual myself, whose ancestors came over from Italy in the late 1800s, I can acknowledge how my skin color has given me access to opportunities that people of color do not have. It is powerful to sit in a space with others and feel the sensations of emotions that surface, including guilt, when discussing race, specifically for me. My most influential moment of addressing my privilege in a more personal manner occurred last semester when I took the Healing Racialized Trauma elective with Dr. Melchior. Her exercises forced us to sit with feelings of privilege as non-white individuals directly stated the impacts discrimination and white privilege had had on them personally. I found myself filled with guilt, but chose to try and channel that energy into appreciating the power it takes to address those of the skin color who predominantly oppress others. In the end, I felt honored that I could be a part of the exercise. And that was something I was able to share vocally, because I really did. It was a very physiological reaction that my body had of appreciation. And as a counselor, cultural competency is key. You know, we know that it's the predominance of what we're learning in the program, and we are not an expert on another person's race. Continued education and personal awareness of your own race as a counselor is necessary. And using Helm's white racial identity development model helps to assess a privileged client in those instances that we may be working with. Socratic questioning then helps us as counselors to explore a client's origin of biases and their attitudes, and especially looking into, you know, the culture they were raised in, some of their cultural norms and traditions, but also their upbringing. What was their family like? You know, what beliefs were encouraged there? And, you know, ultimately, this helps create awareness around the client by discussing these things and address the emotions on the topic. And I think that is a big way we as counselors can help heal an individual, not only from the reason why they came into therapy, but also to stand by multiculturalism and social justice properties by exploring these potential privileges that a client may have when they come into the counseling space.